Hey, everybody. My name is Dan Matthews, and I'm the president of the Arlington Young Democrats. Normally, I'm the producer of these streams, but this week we thought it'd be fun for me to come out from behind the camera and actually host one. I'm still going to be producing, so I'm going to try to do my job best of both worlds for both hosting and producing. But if you notice any hiccups, I just want to apologize in advance for that. So with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest, Takis Karantonis. He's the Democratic candidate for the Arlington County Board. He's an economist with over 25 years of urban and regional planning experience. He arrived in Arlington 14 years ago and has been civically engaged and a community leader ever since. He's been involved with a number of local organizations, appointed to advisory commissions, and served as a precinct captain, and was also campaign manager and political advisor for local progressive candidates, including Eric Gutschall and Parissa Degani-Tafti. Takis is an experienced and inclusive planner. He's served as executive director for the Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization for more than 6 years, and as a dedicated proponent of public transit, Takis is also a member of the County Managers Transit Advisory Commission. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Takis to introduce himself, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the questions. So, Takis, take it away.
The passing of my friend Eric Gutschall. Yet it's not a surprise. I've been involved in Arlington's political scene and civic and county affairs scene for a very long time. Dan has mentioned some of my affiliations and levels of involvement. Uh, the the most important thing is right now that in this very difficult crisis, the COVID crisis that has revealed so many inequalities, so many vulnerabilities and inequalities, that there is only one guide to get us out of that, and this is our values, especially democratic values of equality, of equity, and justice. We really need to focus on these if we want to really find a way to pull out this community out of this crisis in a way that it feels stronger and more resilient after that. And of course, the same applies value-wise. The same applies also to the to overcoming the equity discussions and establishing a way for Arlington to become more equitable and just. We all watched the videos, George Floyd, Rachel Brooks, etc. Thousands of Arlingtonians marched. This was a revealing moment for me and for most of Arlingtonians. I attended the listening session of the county board, and that was extremely interesting and revealing to see how many issues haven't been addressed and have been, waiting to find their way to the public forum. So it's not when we talk about structural racism, about systemic and structural racism. Of course, we don't talk only about law enforcement. We talk also about everything that is surrounding that. It's about housing. It's about work and employment, it's about social services, it's about health, it's about schools. So this is the conversation that we're having in this campaign with the entirety of Arlington. And it's actually, for me, a challenge and a pleasure at the same time to have it in the context of discussing equity and discussing progress in these terms. So this special election is really, at the end of accounts, not just to produce the deliverables of local governments, just fixing the sidewalk and making sure that your sewer line works. This is not only about that. This is really about leadership and values and about restoring trust in a government that works for all Arlingtonians, without exception. And in a way that all Arlingtonians also feel that they are accepted and treated equally, which is the most important question. So this is why I'm running. I'm ready to serve, and I'm open to this discussion and many more that I hope we will be having. So I turn it on to you, Dan.
Well, thank you so much, Takis. I really appreciate that intro. You touched on a lot of topics that we're actually going to get to in this town hall. One of the reasons why we really wanted to do this, not only to highlight how amazing a candidate you are, but we wanted to highlight specifically your plans for young people in this community. Arlington has a very young median age. And it's important that we're able to address the issues that come with being a young person in this community head on. So once again, thank you for joining us. As I mentioned, the median age of Arlingtonians is in the 30s, and it's trending downward. With the influx of new and young members in the community, the next question is how we can engage them in local politics like county board races. What would you do to ensure voices are heard by our community leaders?
Great question. So the number one I want to say is it's not only about being heard. The question is what kind of leverage and influence is afforded to you in this community, right? It's we can have a lot of fora and ways to hear each other. The question is how much of real change happens and how we really engage those who bring up the issues and find solutions that work for everybody. So for me, the number one thing, especially in local politics, is to look to really re-examine how our commissions and how this famous Arlington Way is demographically composed right now. And we have to have a very honest conversation about this and take stock and change that. It's not only intergenerational, it has to be balanced in terms of gender, balanced in terms of race, balanced in terms of income, balanced in many terms. This is not an easy task. I understand that. And you will be needed at the table to help make that happen. I understand that younger people, for example, always will have higher thresholds to go above. So families are more demanding, jobs are more demanding. So we have to find ways to use technology. We have to fine-tune our processes to be more productive and workable for our younger constituents. The same way we have to make them more workable for our non-English speaking constituents, etc. So there are many ways into these processes that we need to open. Then I do believe that we have to engage as many people as possible in education about local issues, about how to work with the local government, about how to engage in their civic association, etc. There is a fantastic thing that's called the Neighborhood College. We need to make sure that as many young Democrats attend that as possible, and that it is properly supported by Arlington County on the other end. Engagement in civic organizations, some of which are very influential but are really skewing older, wealthier, or established, etc. This and whiter as well. So like the Civic Federation, like the Committee of 100, like many of the non-profits that we have in Arlington, charitable and service non-profits. I always thought that a good start would be to make it a habit to have regular fora on specific issues, like with your board members to have a regular forum once or twice a year on housing, on environment, on schools, on public transit, on equity. They shouldn't be cross-generational, of course, but when you call in roundtables of that sort, there is always leadership that springs out of that. So we will see natural occurring, people taking ownership of issues, coming forward, bringing in new ideas, and blooming, and going from there. Again, I'm seeing that in this campaign, how the young Democrats that work with me and supporting me right now, how they learn and how they develop their own angle on a lot of issues that we find right now in the campaign trail that are so that way. I think that you are already very involved with your own power and your own empowerment, and that's great. My job would be just to find ways to make that more efficient in terms of leverage at the end.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that question, specifically addressing that. I do agree with you, especially on that last point. Takis's campaign is heavily, a lot of young Dems are heavily involved, and thank you for giving those people the opportunity, and they've absolutely been hitting it out of the park. So I want to highlight them as well before we move on. The second question I have for you is again about young people, specifically related to housing. I've have a lot of friends who have been in Arlington Young Democrats or other engaged groups, and absolutely love Arlington. They love the community here. They love the people here, but they've been forced to move out of the county because they're either looking for a house or they've chosen to take on a career that doesn't pay the way that Arlington requires to live here. What can you do to fix that missing middle housing piece so that anybody who wants to live here will have that opportunity?
So the cliche phrase in all recent campaigns is that housing is a critical issue, right? Mm-hmm. For Arlington. It's also a major drag on our economy. You just mentioned that. People who don't make an Amazon Corp salary will have it increasingly difficult to find any housing, any decent housing that leaves them with any, available money after that. Mm-hmm. Or their. So this is really critical for the vitality of farming. This is a plea to you to help support every candidate. It's not only me who will be, and push us to be forceful on housing and invest in housing. This is a toolbox of solutions that we will have to implement. You mentioned missing middle, which is not the first thing that would come to my mind when I talk about housing opportunities for younger people. To my mind, what comes first to mind is corridor development, where we can put efficient housing that's supported by transportation, but supported by services, where there is retail and life and a real city around you, where we can, the per capita resource intensiveness of that is way more favorable for the public dollar to be supporting this kind of housing. Missing middle is the next step. It's also a future step for Arlington. It's neighborhood-sized, smaller scale, market-driven housing production that will have to happen, where we determine that we have supportive assets that the ones that I mentioned before on corridors, or similar ones. We need to continue that. We need to test that. We need to study that. But in the first place, we need to do these three things, right? Supply, supply, and supply. And for that, we will need strong constituencies that will slam the hand on the dice and say, this needs to be done. This is a first-degree priority every year, year after year. Investing in the Affordable Housing Investment Fund is a critical budget priority, and budget priorities have to be fought for. They are governed by our values, they are guided by our values. but they need the strong constituencies to make them reality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that question, or for that answer. Specifically
And
related to high density. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, just that. And I didn't forget to talk about renters and about trying to work with landlords and
Uh-huh.
existing situation. The rents are too damn high. I understand that.
Yeah.
But again, an issue of supply. It's a
Mm-hmm.
function of supply, of some supply starvation in this case.
Absolutely. Specifically related, you mentioned developing around corridors. What actions can the county board take specifically to address high density development like that?
The board. So in Arlington, we have for our main transportation corridor, so the Richmond Highway and Watson Boston corridor, we have great plans. For Columbia Pike, we have great plans. For the highway, we also have a plan, and more is in development. So uh, there we know where density has to occur. There we know how density has to occur, what it takes, and what kind of peripheral investment or infrastructure investment is needed for that density. We really have a blueprint for that, and we just should go ahead and take the opportunities when they arise. And we should market Arlington to private investment for this. Now, that said, um, private investment will go always for the highest return on investment, but we want also the other goods like affordability and good meshing with public transportation, and we need to make sure that our schools are not hopelessly overcrowded and that we keep up with all this. So uh, part of the job of the leadership you want to see on the county board is to perform on this, to show leadership, to make this kind of deliverables happen with all the appropriate frame conditions. In Arlington, we haven't been performing very well on this. So we have been performing the right way, smart growth, but the numbers are not overwhelming. The numbers are about half where we wanted to be in terms of affordability. So we need to do better.
Thank you very much for that related to affordability. You also mentioned transportation. What can we do to increase access to affordable public transportation in this community?
Um, right now, we have to rescue it. Right now, we have to rescue it. Right now, public transportation will be the last piece of major urban infrastructure that will recover from COVID, because it's logical that riders don't want to ride it. Not all of them. Um, Making sure that we continue funding Metro, uh, that we sequester any floating, tentative, available, committed uh, investment money or capital investment money to support operations Metro right now is absolutely critical. I was pleased to see that the manager for this year still, even in several revisions of a couple of revisions of the budget, he still has $30 million that Arlington has to put into Metro on the books. That's reassuring to see. Um, I'm coming from the school that the rider of public transportation, together with pedestrian and cyclists, are the top of the hierarchy, the top of the priority. These are our prime customers in urban mobility. We have to serve them the best. Um, and Having a functioning metro is absolutely first priority for me. Second thing is we have to really think how our bus system works and maybe rethink it a little bit. I'm specifically thinking that we had this planning effort for our transportation system about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it's time to review it, revisit that, and really match the best, capacity, frequency, and the density of service to where we have the biggest density of riders. Absolute priority, the biggest density of riders. This is right now a higher priority than, in my opinion, than to serve the entire territory somehow in the same way. We need to serve where we have most riders first and connect them into the metropolitan system uh, and through that to their jobs in a prioritized way. It's part of how the system will recover and how it will help our economy to recover as well. So rescuing it, funding it, making sure that it's safe.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And on the heels of that, I also want to mention green energy and how that plays into public transportation as well. Buses are way more green than taking cars. So in
Yeah,
relation,
yeah. You fix the cars to there is the equivalent of one bus, right?
yeah, exactly. So in relation to that, the environment is one of the, if not the most important issue for young people these days. We're going to see sea levels rising and the temperature of the earth going up, and Arlington is definitely going to be hit like everywhere else. There's already a green energy plan in place. My question for you is, what do you think of that plan, and if you plan on working to accelerate that in any way?
Yeah, that's true that Arlington will be hit like every place else, but not in the same way. One of the things that in the current discussion about equity, you know, climate equity is also a very big issue.
Mm-hmm.
The Commonwealth of Virginia, and you won't believe it, in Arlington as well. The moment that we have, you know, access, for example, to electromobility is an expensive sport right now. It's really not available to everybody. So that's just one of these of many issues to have in mind. But anyway, back to the community energy plan. It's a great thing that Arlington has one. Some people think that we are too small to have a meaningful community energy plan, because we are just a drop on a hot plate that doesn't make any difference. That's not true. I was working as an activist in environmental protection in Arlington, and in green policy was the first thing that I did in Arlington. But it was amazing to me how strong the community of of environmentally minded individuals in Arlington is. And remember, it's not only energy; it's also the natural environment, parks, the natural resources. It's a whole panorama of issues. But back to the core of your question, I do think that we have to push everybody to build better buildings. Our commitment to public transportation, to bicycling, and for me as a planner, I'm one of those who bring in the ideas of restoring this 20-minute neighborhood. So the idea that our city or our town should be comprised of neighborhoods that in per se will be able to satisfy about 60% or a little bit more of your daily needs. Access to transportation, access to retail, access to health, access to employment, these daily needs, regular needs, within 20 minutes walkable distance from your home, right? This is a mindset. This is not just an applicable template of a planning principle. It's a mindset. Is a question that everything that we do, we ask. How far are these? How many times? This is a joke, right? On Colombian Road, it was always a joke to say, in order to run 2 errands, you have to take 7 times your car. So that's exactly what we need to avoid happening. And this will reduce our carbon footprint significantly. Now, the county has to lead by example. Our buildings have to be excellent. The schools are already far better than they ever have been. Can we do better? Of course, we can have more solar. We can make sure that we have a higher ratio of renewable energies. We can begin to think a little bit also in the future about green hydrogen and things like that. But this, we are in the right place. But we have to push into, we have to create the infrastructures. One thing that I want to put out there, and it's not so trivial, is EV charging infrastructure. It's not only that we really don't have the capacity in the electric network of the region to serve a significant increase in electric vehicles. Think about that. EVs, battery-driven mobility, requires that you have a network that's always on and delivers the power. So it's like a sprinkler system that has pressure all the time. So that's a challenge. That's not an easy thing to do. So I'm going to invest a lot of work into finding ways to make that easy.
Well, that's actually great to hear. Before we move on to the next question, I do want to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit more about the 20-minute communities that you mentioned. I think that's a really interesting idea. How would you say Arlington is doing related to that goal? Are there communities that you can think of in Arlington that are doing a good job of that? And how specifically can we encourage those types of communities?
Sure. So the 20-minute neighborhood is actually a good old, is Back to the Future. It's a Back to the Future element. Because this is inspired by the idea that the human scale neighborhood has to have all the ingredients, has to be a place where you want to be, that is complete in many ways, so that it has its retail, it has some healthcare, that it has some transportation, that it has a school, a neighborhood school typically, that it has all these ingredients of everyday life. It has a park, recreational facilities, open space, that is bikeable, it's walkable, all these things. So in the so the boomer generation, in a sense, so the generation that where everything was predicated on the automobile, and this long connectivity and highways, and being able to separate the uses in the city. Here is your downtown commercial, there is your residential, there is your extra radius, suburban, etc. This has destroyed actually the sense of these neighborhoods. This has created sprawl and has taken away the urbanity out of our American citizen that has replicated in many cities across the globe. We are trying to get back to that. In Arlington, we have the right ingredients. We did that, for example, in Columbia Pike, when I worked on form-based coding for Columbia Pike with neighborhood inclusion. These elements of this has to be walkable. We need local retail. We need neighborhood facilities and services, etc. This came back organically. So we have to implement that even more. There are a couple of cities right now that we could, if anybody is interested, the city of Melbourne in Victoria, in Australia, is implementing that on the city-wide scale. This is a large metropolis, so that's an interesting example. The current mayor of Paris, who's running for re-election, Anne Hidalgo, is doing the same. She's running actually on this platform of reorganizing one of the densest cities in the world, based on this criteria, there it's a 15-minute city. So you can go online. It's very easy to Google it and to find it. And I'm really looking forward in discussing that. I'm coming from a neighborhood that has been, so I live in Columbia Heights off Columbia Pike. If you ask my neighbors, what they feel that's missing in the neighborhood, they immediately would say, well, the retail is going away. It's not, we don't see rigorous, neighborhood retail. We don't feel like this is going somewhere, that economic development is, organically growing as we would expect it in our neighborhood, like we had it in the past. So this is the mindset with which we want to return to, this the more neighborhood complete, back to the complete neighborhood
Hmm.
that is walkable, which is the biggest asset of this neighborhood. It's walkable and bikeable.
Hmm.
So yeah, and which makes it also intergenerational, right?
Yeah.
And that's,
I think that's terrific. Thank you so much for going into more detail about that. That's a really fascinating idea, and it sounds like it's got a lot of legs. So I'm interested in learning more. Um, we are going to transition to our next question. Sarah in the chat. I'm also, for everyone, I'm also monitoring the Facebook chat. So my next question was actually about high-speed internet access, but Sarah also asked. So I figure we'll just use Sarah's question. Um, there is a significant digital divide in Arlington. How will you work to address digital equity and broadband access while you're on the board?
I think that COVID-19 makes a very strong case that broadband access is a basic utility. Period. That means as much as we can afford or accept that the home doesn't have water or access to electricity, as much we have to accept, or basically not accept, that the home has no access to broadband. I mean, we have to make sure that we deliver that. Um, in in my opinion, exactly now with the many families that couldn't afford broadband, because broadband in our region and the United States in general is actually expensive if you look at that in the international comparison. Um, we should have acted earlier on this and work with, we have a duopoly here with two ISPs, Verizon and Comcast. We could buy by bulk. Most of the homes that we are talking about, the majority, is wired already or is accessible through normal, as normal customers, and not, they're not exceptionally far away, or they cannot. Uh, so I think that the county board has moved in this direction finally, which I find refreshing and reassuring. But I believe that we have to make that a standard. We have to make sure, for now and for the entire trajectory of this pandemic, and the fact that people, not only students and kids, but also adults, need to have access to information, need to have access um, to entertainment as well. These are very basic things, and we need to make sure that we buy that bulk, means tested, and make it available to the families that cannot otherwise afford it. Now, in the long term, we have also our own infrastructure. We have county has a so-called dark fiber. Um, there is a problem with county government is not in the business of being an ISP. So government cannot do the last mile delivery or the customer service or the billing or this. What we can do is, ideally, we would have a non-profit, a platform that would be able to function as such. So I leave it on the table. That needs to emerge at some point. But for now, I would work with what we have, and what we have are these two providers. Uh, we have a longer conversation about 5G and what the regulatory framework of 5G could be, and whether we could commit some of the capacity of 5G to serve individuals. I'm open to this conversation.
All right, thank you so much for that. It's great to
But
see that that's a
remember that
priority.
in Virginia, we have 600,000 Virginians that don't have access to broadband. For starters, I mean, that's already
Yeah, it's
rural there, but yeah.
well. Thank you so much for that answer. I totally agree with you that it should be an absolute priority that we make sure that everybody has access in their homes. You mentioned, you touched that COVID-19 really made this. It highlighted how serious a problem this is now that more people are working from home. Just to touch on that a little bit more, our community's now entered phase 2 of COVID-19 reopening and is soon to enter phase 3. Uh, Businesses have been allowing customers inside for the first time in months. Do you think that enough has been done so far to attack the virus from a community standpoint? And are you worried about small businesses shutting down as a result of this virus? And if so, what can we do to support small businesses going forward?
Well, small businesses were shut down in phase zero, right? So the question is how many are going to come back and how. Uh, we have lost several, and we don't really know how many. The federal programs actually, with all their issues and dismal implementation and rollout, uh, they still have at least managed to save some, rescue some. Uh, and in Arlington, I have to say that thanks to the fact that not all our economy was so exposed to COVID, so a very large part of our economy still was able to function with telecommuting and everything. So that that is a that was supportive of the of a of the idea of being optimistic about the recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going forward, these businesses, we especially the restaurants, and there are businesses that are still absolutely recovered. So think of the airport, which is a huge employer, right? Um, but in our hospitality industry, no question about that. These are big businesses. They have a different financial approach to all this. We will have to see how best to support them and work with Richmond and the federal government to find a way to support our. These are very vital sectors for us. But for the very small businesses, I have been proposing a microloan program. I'm not a very big fan of grants. I think grants are good for rescuing, or it was a very good thing that Arlington had the grant program to start with. It came a little bit late, but it's okay. It came, and it was substantial because at the end it was decently funded. But we need a program that will help us throughout the next year and a half, and from there in perpetuity, basically. And so I thought a microloan program where if you need the extra money, the extra capital, you can go and borrow $50,000 or $100,000 with with decent, soft conditions, longer maturities, but you will eventually pay that back, so that the taxpayer that's why it replenishes the fund basically. So that will help to get over COVID. What I am seeing and what I really want to accomplish with that is that small businesses have the audacity, the innovation capacity, they're competitive, and they employ the right people to pivot and adapt to the situation, make the best out of it. And therefore, I want to help them to have the ability to do that. The classic bank system wouldn't do that because the risk would be too big. But we can do that with a microloan program, and I'm sure that private money will jump in, but we keep our side of the bargain. Now, critical in all this is that business people and we, all of us, keep social distancing, wear our masks, and do what the experts tell us to do. We are not doing that very well. As you've seen, this last weekend the news are not great. In Arlington, not so bad, and in Virginia, not so bad, but in other places in the United States are really alarming. And as a nation, we don't seem to be exiting this first wave, and that's an issue because this can come back and bite us from a different point of view of a even deeper recession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree that we need to be wearing masks. Everybody on the call, wear your masks. I've seen some people out.
Yeah.
Wear your masks. Yeah. It's not hard.
and help the small business, especially. I've been in Crystal City. They've been doing some amazing stuff. I mean, they created new spaces outside on parking lots, and we discovered all of a sudden that parking lots are really not so important. That actually having a fantastic patio with people sitting now, in social safe distancing, is actually a far better experience for the customer and for the business. So just encourage them to wear the mask, make it safe so that everybody feels comfortable. The moment that the customer feels safe and comfortable, the customer will come back. These jobs will come back. Um, this is really important. This is really about getting the customer back into, to patronize these businesses, restaurants especially.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for that answer on COVID. It's definitely a huge priority right now to make sure that not only is everybody safe, but we're also bringing our economy back, and we're making sure that that workers around the county can get back to work as fast as possible. We're gonna finish up. I only have a couple more questions left, and I'm gonna make sure that I get to all the questions in the chat as well. We're gonna finish up on the topic of inequality and racism within Arlington. I'm actually going to start with a question from Maya in the chat, and then we have a couple more as well. So the first question on this topic comes from Maya. Young people of color face additional barriers to acquiring housing due to a wealth gap from the continued oppression of black and brown bodies. What will you do to help young people of color be successful and eventually gain the ability to be property owners in Arlington?
So, yeah, Maya is absolutely right. Despite the fact that it's completely illegal to discriminate them, but they are discriminated, right? So that's absolutely clear. So investment in affordable housing, again, Maya points exactly to this very basics. We need to really make our affordable housing policies work better than until now. We need to make sure that the public transportation that's supporting them works. We need to make the school system to work for everybody and be equitable. All these basic. This is the basic infrastructure, political infrastructure for all this, so that we can make advances there. And of course, we have to have an eagle's eye on this. Of course, we have to make sure that our housing commission has young members as well, and members of the black community, and members of the immigrant community, and members of all involved communities. Of course, the same applies to the Tenant Landlord Commission. Notice we have to be able to monitor, report, and be very frank about what is happening, how we have to fix that. And when things happen, like for example, we have now huge issues with a lot of lower and medium income households, many of which are minority, they are black households, they are minority households. These are people who lost their jobs, who cannot pay their rent, who are facing eviction coming the 29th of June. And despite the fact that we made several millions of dollars available through various channels, and to the credit of the county board, they really scrambled to do that, and they did. Despite that fact, this is still not enough, and there is still a very big danger, liability of having many households coming out of the eviction protection with debt that they cannot serve, and they will eventually face displacement. So this is the moment where we have to put the money where our mouth is. Period. No more question. And the access to home ownership, which means the access to the idea of settling down, of staying in Arlington, growing in Arlington, etc., is part of this, is part of housing policy and part of urban development policy. For me, again, making sure that all these ingredients, housing, transportation, schools, health, social services, work, this is what eventually enables us to find paths that we can support young minority, women, black, immigrants, and other minorities to access access to housing as owners. We have programs to do that. We have to fund these programs. Prerequisite to funding these programs is to have a healthy economy and to be able to afford that, and also healthy political, leadership to be able to put the priorities where they have to be. I'm all committed to that, but I need to help in every single level of these of the basics, so that we can have equity from the bottom.
Mm. Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, we're speaking of equity. There's been a recent string of racist incidents in Arlington with the high school banner, and then the Black Lives Matter chalk getting washed away, amongst numerous others. That's exposed the extent to which there is inequity and racism that is rampant in our community, and it's systemic. How do you plan on attacking systemic racism head on within our community?
Well, these incidents are just uh, they range from having to scratch your head and say what they think. That's the high school ban, and how insensitive it can be, to the absolutely unacceptable. The fact that 3 county employees black employees were sent to power wash quotes of Martin Luther King in chalk on the driveway. That there was nobody to say, "I'm sorry," to whoever the complainant there was. "I'm sorry, but we cannot do that again. We won't do that." So it was very clear, and that these employees were empowered to say no on the spot. If there was a misunderstanding, say, "No, I'm sorry, this is not really serious. It's a frivolous request, and it's a racist request. And we provide customer service, but we don't provide service to racist customers, period. End of story," and we go home. So that's part of a mentality that needs to change, period. And this is why we are talking about participation in the case of law enforcement with a specific oversight body for police, but this has to permeate everything else. We need to have participation of our marginalized communities everywhere, and we need to report and take stock, monitor and report that, so that we are accountable on this, and we're measured at how well or not so well we do that. And again, the moment every year when the budget time comes, this is when we put the money where our mouth is, and the budget reflects our values. So this is when we invest in housing that will serve these marginalized communities as well, that we will invest in social safety net, that we will invest in all these government or local government budget items that create equality and equity.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I am asked what I think is the biggest problem in Arlington, and it's income inequality and wealth inequality, which tracks race, tracks privilege. So that's hard.
Mm-hmm. That's actually so interesting. That was my next question. So you are you're ahead of the game. But thank you so much for that answer. I have one question left for you. It's kind of a two-parter, one macro, one micro section. So recently there's been significant demand for reform of our police department. To what extent would you see the police either reformed or defunded, or a mixture of the two? And what would your first action be related to this? The second part of the question is, you mentioned at the beginning of this that you attended a listening session last week. And I would like to end this by just asking you what did you really find interesting about hearing from the community in that way? Was there anything that surprised you that came out of that? And have any of your ideas changed or evolved since attending that listening session? So a lot to go on there, but I just kind of wanted to give you that opportunity to speak.
Yeah, I find almost everything very interesting. I shouldn't say. This is always good to, I, I, I work with a lot of people. I work a place that, by the way, I work for the Ethiopian Community Development Council, so you can imagine that I'm exposed to the daily narrative of how life really is in Arlington and other places, in Fairfax and Baltimore. So this is not surprising at any rate. But it's very interesting to have the testimony of people with the name and last name and residents here in our neighborhoods and say, look, this is happening. Corporation X has, I have problems that they are recipients of affordable housing investment funding, yet they evicted residents for a few reasons, and these were so, or that there is issues with how we respond to mental health, etc. And we should be doing that. Like for example, they do that in Oregon. So that's a very long list of very insightful comments that came there, really from the heart and in a very honest way, in direct way. So I would really have a very long list of issues there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you asked what would be the first thing with regards to the law enforcement issue, with the reform of law enforcement here. The very first issue for me, the absolute number one priority, is to realize that our chief of police leadership plays a very big role, as we've seen almost everywhere. Our chief of police has told us that he is retiring at the end of this year, 2020. So I don't understand why we haven't started a robust, open, honest, public consultation process to give guidance to the county board and to the county manager, whose job it is to hire any head of department, including the head of police, about what we want to see in leadership in policing and law enforcement in Arlington in the next years. So what kind of leadership we are looking for, what attributes we want to see. So I'm missing this. This is an important thing for me. And I think that this would be the very first thing that would encourage the county manager to start, also the county board to start. That's to me that's the number one. The number two, of course, is to create the police review board. Several other jurisdictions have similar boards. We can take a page from there and start there, but we have to do that as soon as possible. There is a broad agreement on this, and implement the body cam decision that we will have the system, but I'm not so sure that we have talked about the policies that will be governing the implementation and rollout of this. So there are many questions that need to be answered there. So I think that these are all pending issues that we need to be discussing very soon, as soon as possible. Maybe I don't remember the rest of the scene of the question. What else did you ask?
Oh, you kind of hit all of them, actually. You nailed it. I was just asking what would be your first action to address reforming our police department, and then you also mentioned your feedback on the listening session. So thank you for that really thoughtful answer, and thank you for really emphasizing the community-driven approach, hosting listening sessions, reaching out to the community, and understanding exactly what they would like to see from the next chief of police. I think that's really powerful. So one little bonus question that I always like to ask is, what didn't I ask that I should have?
Ah. One thing that I believe that is not finding a lot of attention right now is the issue of personal personal data protection, and that's that it begins to be an issue that permeates everything. But we are so stunned by these big problems, like the equity problem, just that we forget this bread and butter stuff that is kind of creeping up all the time. One other issue that I would be very interested to hear is the issue of gender equality. We seem to have this has we and the issue of other communities like the LGBTQ community, and where we can make more progress in an already progressive community. What needs to be still accomplished there. Um, these are two things um, that I am specifically interested in advancing. Uh, and last but not least, the continuous issue of the displacement, the erosion of our immigrant community. When I came to Arlington, we had about over 20% of Hispanic or Spanish-speaking population. We are barely under 16% right now. This says something. So that's to me important. Voters willing. God, I don't know. We have to negotiate. No, I want to thank you for hosting that and for being engaged and for continuing to fuel healthy, forward-thinking public dialogue in Arlington. Um, I hope that we will find even more ways to amplify these conversations and have them not only in the campaign but also in an ongoing way, because these are important conversations. These questions have to be answered not only an election, but also after an election. That's something I really commit to do.